My mother-in-law completely lost it when she found out I was pregnant, going so far as to try and sabotage me, all while obsessing over her own wedding and stirring up unnecessary drama. So, let me get straight to the point, our relationship has never been good. Not even for a second. From day one, she's been dismissive, condescending, and downright rude. And no, it's not because she's a protective mother who thinks no one is good enough for her son. If only it were that simple. The truth? She can't stand the fact that I'm a good wife to him. For context, my husband Rick had a childhood no kid should have to endure. His mother never believed in long-term relationships, bouncing from one man to the next like they were disposable. Even when she did marry, twice, both unions ended in disaster. Rick, her eldest, was a front-row spectator to all the chaos. His parents' relationship was nothing short of toxic, sometimes even turning violent. As if that wasn't bad enough, his mother was a heavy drinker. She'd get so lost in her booze-fueled stupors that she'd forget basic things, like feeding her own child. His biological father was marginally better, but after he left, things only spiraled further. Rick had no choice but to grow up fast. With no one else looking out for him, he became his own caretaker. And when his mother's drinking wasn't enough to numb her problems, she turned to drugs. That meant Rick had to care for her too, just to make sure she didn't end up overdosing in some alleyway. By the time he reached college, he was done. He packed his things, moved into his dorm, and never looked back. His mother, of course, played the victim. She guilt-tripped him relentlessly, painting him as a heartless son who abandoned his own mother. And when words weren't enough, she went for his wallet, pressuring him into giving her a cut of whatever he made at his part-time jobs. He felt responsible for her, so he gave in. By his third year of college, she had remarried and given birth to a daughter, Susan. Rick, knowing exactly what kind of mother she was, vowed to be different. He was always gentle with his stepsister, and to this day, they share an unbreakable bond. Once his mother had a new husband, she stopped badgering Rick for money. Her latest spouse became her new provider. She got busy raising Susan, and for a while, she faded into the background. Then Rick met me. We worked at the same company. He was younger, I was his senior. I won't lie, from the first time I saw him, I noticed how handsome he was. But professionalism kept me in check. It wasn't until 8 months later, when he finally admitted he'd been harboring a crush on me, that we went out on our first date. It didn't take long to realize we were serious about each other. We followed protocol and disclosed our relationship to HR. Thankfully, our company had no strict policies against workplace dating, as long as it was reported. Rick always tells me I changed his life for the better. I don't know if that's true, but one thing was clear from the start: his mother had way too much control over him. She was an expert manipulator, guilt-tripping him into submission whenever he tried to assert himself. The moment they disagreed, she'd cut deep, comparing him to his father, the same man who walked out on them. It crushed him. Every single time. When I entered the picture, I encouraged him to set boundaries. To reclaim his life. And little by little, he did. These days, Rick doesn't let her walk all over him. And one thing about him? He loves to brag about me. It's one of the things I adore most about him, his pride in our relationship. Even when I get embarrassed, he doesn't hold back. So naturally, whenever he talked to his mother, he'd rave about how happy he was with me. How well I treated him. And that's when the resentment started brewing. Hearing Rick say his life had never been better made her seethe. She tried to twist things around, playing the martyr, claiming she'd sacrificed so much for him. But Rick wasn't buying it. He threw it right back at her, reminding her that it was his childhood she stole, his years wasted taking care of her. She hated that. Hated being held accountable. Her response? The past should stay in the past. Anytime he brought it up, she'd snap, scolding him for daring to dredge it up. Then, one night, she showed up at our doorstep. Drunk. Sobbing. She couldn't live with her husband anymore. Why? Because she cheated on him with some random guy at a bar. And this stranger, upon discovering she was married, did what any decent person would do: he tracked down her husband on Facebook and spilled everything. Apologized. Said he had no idea she was someone's wife. Understandably, her husband was livid. He confronted her. She, in true fashion, refused to take responsibility. Called it a one-time mistake. told him if he were a real man, he'd fight for their marriage. He didn't. He packed her bags, threw her out, and closed the door on that chapter of his life. That's how she ended up crying on our front porch, expecting Rick to pick up the pieces, just like always. Rick, for the first time in his life, didn't cave. He told her this mess was her doing and that she needed to apologize to her husband. But she wasn't having it. She scoffed, declared she didn't need him because she had Rick. I rolled my eyes so hard I saw another dimension. This was her routine. Wreck her life, then expect her son to sweep up the debris. But this time, things were different. I was in the picture now. And I had no intention of letting her disrupt our home. I pulled Rick aside and told him straight I wasn't about to deal with her drama indefinitely. She needed to find another place to stay. Thankfully, he agreed. We let her crash for a week, but she did nothing to make it easier for us. Dirty dishes piled up. Laundry left scattered. She didn't lift a finger. She'd demand I cook her favorite meals, and when I was too exhausted, she'd mock me for ordering takeout, claiming Rick deserved better. I bit my tongue because I wanted to be the bigger person. That patience ran out the moment I found a cigarette butt on my kitchen floor. She had been smoking inside my home. That was it. I was done. I told Rick we needed to talk. He sat her down, calmly explained she had to leave. And, just as expected, she lost it. Accused him of being ungrateful. Said as his mother, she had every right to stay as long as she pleased. I laughed in her face. Our home. Our rules. She had no claim to anything here, and she had burned through every ounce of generosity we had left. Rick backed me up, adding that maybe, just maybe, it was time she swallowed her pride and went back to her husband. Or found somewhere else to go. Because she sure as hell wasn't staying here. The moment I stood my ground, her face twisted with fury. My mother-in-law exploded, shrieking at Rick, demanding to know how I dared to speak to her that way. Her voice, sharp as a dagger, lashed out, insisting that this was none of my business and that I should keep my mouth shut. But I'm not the kind of woman who backs down. Keeping my composure, I met her gaze and told her, in no uncertain terms, that her days of control and manipulation were over. We wouldn't tolerate her theatrics invading our home any longer. I made it clear she had to leave. Her eyes widened, stunned at my audacity, but before she could unleash another tirade, Rick cut in, his voice firm. He told her she had no right to speak to me like that I was his equal, his partner, and that he wouldn't stand for anyone, especially not her, disrespecting me. He reminded her that I had cared for her tirelessly all week, something she never appreciated. Then, his words landed like a thunderclap. He told her how grateful he was to have me, that I had done more for him than she ever had in her entire life. That was a wound she couldn't ignore. Her face turned red as she yelled back, insisting she had always done her best for him. She ranted that he owed her everything, that he should be grateful for the life she had given him, and that the least he could do was let her live with us. But Rick was done listening. The next morning, she packed her bags and left. Later, we found out she had moved in with Susan. The whole ordeal deepened the wedge between us, but I never regretted standing up to her. Looking back, it all made sense. She had always resented me. When Rick and I got married, she had warned him that he'd regret choosing a woman like me, that he needed a more traditional wife to run his household. The irony? She was the last person who could preach about being a devoted homemaker. To prove her point, she boycotted our wedding, but honestly, no one missed her. We had the time of our lives. Fast forward to now, I'm 3 months pregnant. After suffering a miscarriage before, Rick and I kept this pregnancy quiet, taking no chances. Now, safely past the danger zone, we decided it was time to share our joy. We planned an intimate gathering, inviting close family and friends. Rick insisted his mother should be there. Despite our strained history, I agreed. At the end of the day, I wanted our child to be surrounded by love. As guests trickled in, their eyes would land on my belly, and realization would dawn, followed by shouts of excitement and warm embraces. The atmosphere buzzed with happiness, everyone was thrilled, tossing around baby name suggestions. Then, the doorbell rang. Rick's mother arrived, and what we saw left us speechless. She strolled in arm with a man none of us recognized. I shot a glance at Rick, he looked just as blindsided. With a smug grin, she introduced him as her fiancé, casually announcing their upcoming wedding. My jaw nearly hit the floor. She hadn't even mentioned a word about him to us, yet she chose our gathering to make this grand reveal. Rick was visibly irritated, but we held back, unwilling to dampen the mood. We forced polite smiles, congratulated her, and I stepped forward to shake her fiancé's hand. But before I could, she suddenly noticed my belly. Her smile froze. Her eyes darted between me and Rick, darkening with something unreadable. Then, in a sharp, accusing tone, she demanded to know if I was pregnant. I nodded. A wave of cheers erupted around us. But she didn't share their joy, her face flushed red with something closer to anger than excitement. Glaring at Rick, she snapped, asking why he hadn't told her. Without missing a beat, he quipped back, pointing out that she hadn't exactly given us a heads up about her engagement either. She wasn't amused. She insisted that, as his mother, she had the right to be the first to know about her future grandchild. I calmly explained that, given our past loss, we had waited until we felt safe to share the news. That's why we gathered everyone today, to celebrate. But that answer didn't satisfy her. Then, she dropped a bombshell: she was getting married in 6 months. The same time I would be giving birth. And she was furious. Incredibly, her biggest concern wasn't the grandchild on the way but that she would now have to speed up her wedding. She whined that she didn't want to be called a grandmother on her big day. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Instead, I rolled my eyes. I told her she should be celebrating both milestones, the joy of a new marriage and a new life entering the world. But, like a child throwing a tantrum, she ignored me completely, turning away as if I wasn't even in the room. Typical. By now, I knew exactly how she operated. I let it go, choosing to enjoy the company of those who actually cared. Soon, Susan arrived, all smiles as she hugged us and congratulated us on the pregnancy. Rick asked if she knew anything about their mother's engagement. Her confusion mirrored ours. She admitted she hadn't heard a single word about a new man. Then, with a smirk, she joked, "Well, are we really surprised? She swaps men like the weather changes." As lunch was being served, I got up to help, but Rick and my parents stopped me, insisting I take it easy. Then, in a bizarre twist, my mother-in-law, who had been ignoring me minutes ago, suddenly insisted on serving me. The shift was so abrupt it made my head spin. She loudly declared she would personally fix me a plate so that I wouldn't have to lift a finger. I smiled, though I was wary. This was completely out of character. She had never gone out of her way for me before. Ever. When she returned, she handed me a plate with an exaggerated flourish, announcing to the room that she had carefully chosen more vegetables for me because a healthy grandbaby was her top priority. The guests around us cooed at her thoughtfulness. But I wasn't fooled. Something felt off. I eyed the plate, scanning the food for anything suspicious. Everything looked normal. But my instincts screamed otherwise. Casually, when no one was looking, I switched plates with hers. No one seemed to notice, except her fiancé. He caught my subtle move, watching with quiet curiosity. But he said nothing. I silently hoped he wouldn't snitch. Before she could return, I dug into the food, determined to make it seem like everything was fine. She came back, seating herself beside me. With an expectant smile, she asked if I was enjoying my meal. I assured her that I was. She then told me to make sure I tried the salad, emphasizing how important greens were for expectant mothers. I nodded, continuing to eat. Then, she took her first bite. Her expression twisted in an instant. Cheeks puffing out, she chewed slowly, then, with a loud, dramatic gag, she spat the food out in front of everyone. My eyes widened. What had she just tried to feed me? My stomach dropped as I watched her eyes narrow at the plate in front of her. She scrutinized it, her fingers gripping the edge just a little too tightly. The others at the table were oblivious, asking if she was feeling all right, but I knew exactly what was happening. That was the very plate she had handed to me, the one I had secretly swapped with hers. She took a sip of her drink, only to be interrupted by a fit of coughing. With an apologetic smile, she excused herself and hurried toward the bathroom. My pulse hammered in my ears. I leaned toward Rick, voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't want to cause a scene, but the thought of what she might have slipped into my food sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I recounted everything, my words tumbling over each other, but Rick just stared, disbelief flickering across his face. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. I nodded firmly. "I don't know what she did, but I switched the plates. If you don't believe me, ask your mother's fiancé." A dark shadow passed over Rick's expression. Without another word, he pushed his chair back and stormed inside. I barely had time to react before I saw him deep in conversation with his mother's fiancé. His jaw was tight, his voice clipped, and even though I couldn't hear them, his anger was undeniable. Then she returned, her face carefully composed, but her eyes flickered with confusion. She sensed something was off. She opened her mouth, probably to feign concern, but Rick cut her off cold. His voice was measured, but the weight of his words was crushing. "Did you do something to my wife's food?" The question sliced through the air, silencing the table. Everyone turned to watch. His mother's face shifted into a mask of innocence. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I just wanted to make sure she had a healthy meal for the baby." Rick wasn't buying it. His fists clenched at his sides. "If you don't tell the truth right now, I'll call the police." Gasps rippled through the guests. Nobody knew I had switched the plates. Nobody realized she had eaten what was meant for me. Her composure cracked. Panic flickered across her features before she hastily backpedaled. "It was just a joke," she blurted out. "I only added extra salt to the salad. It's harmless." My breath caught in my throat. "Why?" I demanded. My voice wavered, but my anger burned steady. She scoffed. "It's just salt. It wouldn't kill you. You'd probably just throw up a little, like I did. Not a big deal." My skin went cold. Before I could say anything, Rick erupted. His fury filled the room. "Are you out of your mind? You did this to a pregnant woman?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. As a new mother, you should get used to throwing up." That was it. My mother, who had always been composed, stepped forward, her voice like a blade. "How dare you play with my daughter's health? You should be ashamed. You're not just endangering her, you're putting your own grandchild at risk." The room was deathly silent. Rick turned to his mother, voice steel. "You're done. Get out. Now." Her fiancé shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting no part of this. She looked around, searching for support. None came. She scoffed but finally relented. Rick didn't give her the chance to argue further. He grabbed her arm, steering her toward the door. I stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Around me, our family and friends murmured in hushed voices, offering their quiet support. Rick returned moments later, running a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "I'm sorry," he muttered, glancing around at the guests. "Let's not let her ruin tonight. We still have something to celebrate." The evening continued, but the air was different now. The warmth, the excitement, it had all been tainted. That night, as Rick and I lay in bed, I turned to him. "We can't let her near the baby. Not after this." He didn't hesitate. "We won't." Update 1. I can't believe the support we've received over the past few days. So many of you asked why we even feel guilty about cutting her off. The truth is, Rick never had a normal parent-child relationship. It's always been toxic, but cutting ties? That's not easy, even when it's the right thing to do. But this time, it's different. We're not just thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about our baby. And Rick? He's made up his mind. He's going to talk to her alone. I don't have the energy to see her ever again. Hopefully, it goes well. I'll update you soon. Update 2. It's been a month. I wish I had better news. Rick confronted her, and as expected, it turned into a screaming match. But now that she knows we want nothing to do with her, she refuses to let go. She keeps showing up, always when Rick is at work, always when I'm home alone. It's unsettling. We have security cameras, so I never answer the door. But she doesn't stop. She leaves chocolates, flowers, gifts I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Just looking at them sends my paranoia spiraling. Rick doesn't even hesitate. He comes home, sees them, and throws them straight into the trash. I feel trapped in this cycle of anxiety. My mother has started coming over when she can, just to keep me company. I try to focus on the baby, on staying healthy. But the fear lingers. Will she ever give up? Update 3. I know it's been a while. Life has been hectic. But I have news. A few weeks ago, after countless ignored visits, she left a letter in our mailbox. I hesitated before opening it, expecting more manipulation, more guilt. But what I found was unexpected. It was an apology. A real one. She admitted she was wrong. She acknowledged the harm she had caused. And she promised, swore, that she would respect our wishes, that she wouldn't contact us again unless we were ready. I sat there, rereading her words over and over, unable to believe them. When Rick got home, I asked him to confirm the handwriting. It was hers. And here's the twist, she's married now. It happened fast, suspiciously fast. Maybe that's why she wants to start over. Maybe she really means it. I want to believe her. I do. But I can't. Not yet. For now, we keep our distance. We focus on our baby, our future. We build a life free from her chaos. Maybe one day, things will change. But today, we're choosing peace.